going to start this tutorial by installing the Active Directory. We're going to set up server 2022 AD as the Active Directory. Then after that, we're going to join the SQL Test 01 and SQL Test 02 to the domain so that we can use the Active Directory to manage all the server. So just to be clear, this is not the responsibility of a DBA. Before you join a company, this must have been set up. Otherwise, there's going to be like a server team or infrastructure team that will be responsible for setting up the Active Directory. So, but in order for you to understand what is happening at the back end, as a DBA, that's a very good knowledge. If you understand how the Active Directory is set up, how you can create a window clustering at the backup, make it easy for you to troubleshoot whenever you have issue with your SQL Server performance. And that's the reason why I'm setting up this environment to mirror what the enterprise environment will look like and for us to be able to understand SQL Server better. So let's connect to the Active Directory, that's Server 2022, and set that up as the Active Directory. So the first time you connect to the server manager dashboard is going to open. Right now, by default, file and storage service is installed is enabled on this server. So the first thing we're going to do to make sure that we're able to enable the Active Directory role on this server and the DNS, because we're going to use the same server as the Active Directory and the DNS. So the first thing we're going to do is to make sure the network card is using the localhost, which is the 127.0.0.1 IP address as the DNS, so that this server can use its own DNS to serve the DNS to other server. Okay, so I'm going to go into the network setting. So under the Ethernet, you're going to go to the network sharing. You select the network card that you have, go to the property under the TCP/IP. So as you can see, I already set the static IP address. The static IP address for the server is 21. So this is the IP address that other server, the test 02 and test 01, you're going to use this as the DNS. But in the Active Directory, we're just going to use the IP address 1021. So for DNS, since this server is going to serve as its own DNS, so we're going to use a loopback address or localhost address, which is 127.0.0.1. Another way, if I want this to reach out to the internet, I can use alternate IP address, which is my router IP address, so that this server can have access to the internet. Okay, I'm gonna click OK, close. So you see now this is showing no internet access, then as it's going to change to the internet access later. But let's continue with the setup. Now, once the IP address is set up, the next step is to add the role that we want to use on this server. So you click on the role, you click on next. We want the role and the feature installation. You click next. This is the name of the server and the IP address. We click next. So we are going to set this up as Active Directory domain. Okay. So these are the other features that will be installed with it. And we want this to act as the DNS also. Select that. Click on next. Now there's no changes that needs to be done here. We just click on next and next. Then next. So we just click on the install. So the installation will take a little bit of time. So I'm going to pause the video and come back later once the installation is complete. Okay, the installation is successful. So we're going to So now we enable the AD and the DNS, but we need to promote this server to be a domain. So I'm going to click on that. Then we're going to set up a new forest. Our forest name is going to be abc.com. Okay, this name can be anything. In a real world, you will have registered this name with a company like GoDaddy. You get your domain name, then you can use that name as your server name here. Sorry, as your root domain name. But this is just like a generic name for this purpose. And I'm going to just use abc.com. You're going to click next. So the functional level and the domain functional level are going to remain as 2016. This is going to make it possible for any application, so any computer or any operating system that are older and that are earlier, that are manufactured after 2016, will be able to connect to the Active Directory. So we're going to leave this read-only domain. We don't need to check that because this is going to be our main domain controller. So I'm going to create a complex password. You want to make sure the password is complex enough because this is a gateway to the company. If this password is hacked or this server is hacked by by hacker, it's going to be a big trouble because they will have access to everything within the company, and that is not good. So I'm going to click next on this. Then since this server is going to be acting as its own DNS, we're going to leave this as it is. Click on next. The BIOS name, so NetBIOS name is going to be the name that this computer, the domain, is going to be recognized with on the network, and this is going to be defaulted to our ABC. That is the name of our domain. I'm going to click on next. So we're going to leave this the way it is. This is where the Active Directory database folder will be created, because Active Directory is like a database also that is the folder that is going to use to store all those information. Click on next. Now this is all our selection, and the next step is going to validate the selection to make sure everything is correct, and after that we're going to click on install. Now the installation take a long time because if there's any update, the update is going to be installed, the server is going to be promoted to be the Active Directory, and the DNS is going to be enabled so that other server can use this as their DNS. So once we're done with this installation, we're going to go ahead and add test 01 and test 02 that we currently have in VM in the VM environment. So we're going to add those two to the Active Directory and we'll be able to manage them. Okay, let's go back to the installation. So right now, the prerequisite for this needs to be installed. So once we click on installation, everything will be done and the server will be restarted. So once this is done, I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Installation is complete. And now the server restarted once, and the first time it came up is going to go ahead and set up the group policy and configure this server as the Active Directory at the domain controller for the whole system. So let's wait for this to do its thing. Okay, the installation is done. Now we are in the server manager dashboard. So this is loading. Now it's going to load here and show the Active Directory and the DNS. Wait for that. At the same time, we can come into this place and search for DNS. Okay, let's look at it. So these are DNS. We have that set up, and if you can see here under the server manager, we have the Active Directory setup. We have the DNS setup on the same server. So that means this server is now a domain controller. So let's look for the Active Directory. Active Directory users and computer. So here we have a domain abc.com. Under that, we have all the built-in, the default folders. So under this, right now, there is nothing. So this is where the list of all the computers that are part of this domain will be listed. So by the time we add the test01 and test02 to the domain, once we come to this, we're going to see them, the name listed in this side. And also, all the users that are going to be using this domain in a company. So this is where all the user information are being managed. So you can create a new group, then you add all your user to that group. For DBA, it's very important to have a DBA group and one for read only and one for the sysadmin, so that if you have a new DBA, which is going to be like a junior DBA, and you want that person to only have the read only, you can add them to the read only group. But if you have a senior DBA that understands the environment better, then you can give that person the sysadmin role by adding them to the sysadmin group for the DBA. So creating a group is the best way to manage permission within SQL. You can create a group for a finance or for the salespeople, the sales team, add all the username and only add the group to the database. So I will show you how to do that once we get to the database side. So but right now we have our Active Directory set up. We have the DNS setup. The next step is to join the test01 and test02 to the domain. So let's do that. So we're going to start by adding test01 to the Active Directory. So let's go ahead and open test01. Okay. As you can see, this is SQL test01. So we're going to add this to the Active Directory. So in order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is to go into the control panel. Just like we set up the network on the domain controller, we're going to make sure that the IP address of the DNS to this computer is the same thing as the Active Directory IP address. As you can see, that is already been configured. So coming to the TCP IP under the property, so this is the IP address of the domain controller, and this is the IP address of this server. So once that is done, the next step is to go back to the control panel under the system. So here we're going to make sure that we're using domain instead of a workgroup. So right now under the computer name, so we have the computer name, but this computer is joining, is connected to a work group. So we need this to be a domain. So I'm going to select the domain controller, domain, and add a domain name, which is abc.com. Now, so once we have the name added, so click OK. And this is going to be the account that has admin access to the domain. So the same account that was created when the domain was being installed. So Okay, we're going to click OK right here. If everything works right, we're going to get a confirmation that this is connected to Active Directory. Then we're going to go ahead and restart the server. So let's wait for it. Okay, and see here, welcome to abc.com domain. So great. We must restart. So the computer is going to restart. And when that is done, we're going to come back and show you what this looks like. Okay, the computer is restarting. And now to log in to this server, before we just logging in as an administrator, but right now, before you log in, you're going to include the domain name. That is going to be abc.com/administrator to log in. So let's go into the control panel once again, so that we can validate that this is actually connected to the Active Directory. So see this. As you can see, it's now sqltest01.abc.com. So we go into the advanced setting right here under the computer name. See, this is now connected to abc.com and it's now using the domain. So at the same time, if we go into the Active Directory, let's see. So this is the Active Directory right here. Go under the computer, let's refresh. See, we have SQL Test 01 as one of the computer that is in this domain. So right now, from this, we can add, we can manage the server, we can do everything that any Active Directory can do, because listen, this is our own Active Directory. But this tutorial is not about Active Directory. So we just going to go ahead and add test 02, and at the same time, you can come back here and do the same thing. So I'm going to do that quickly, then come back and show you after everything has been added. Okay, this is test 02. Been added to the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this also. Let's get that done quickly. Restart. Okay. Server is back on. Click connect. So this is test 02. It's connected to the domain. As you can see, SQL test 02. I'm going to make this a full screen. Directory level. So let's quickly check the active, the control panel to be sure that our server is part of the domain. And at the same time, we're going to check the Active Directory to be sure the server is showing up under this. You can see we have SQL. And let's go to the Active Directory. This is what we had before. By refreshing, we have the second one. Good. Now we have our environment set up. We have the Active Directory, and we have set up, we have added our two servers, the SQL Test 01 and SQL Test 02 to the Active Directory. The next step is for us to cluster this server together. We're going to use a window cluster, window clustering to cluster SQL Test 01 and SQL Test 02 together, so that we can use two of them as one server to be able to migrate a database from one server to another. And we can use functionality like a always on availability group that make it easy for our database to always be available. And this is how the backend is set up before that can be done. So the Active Directory is set up. We have our test 01 and test 02 added to the Active Directory. So that concludes this tutorial. Then let's go to the next step, which is going to be enabling the clustering on the server. Thank you.